Man, I highly underestimated how nice it was to have a technical guru with everything set up behind the scenes. Can everybody see me? Awesome. And if you just want to use, make sure to pull up your chat so you can use that. I'll follow along, as will Nick from the Biosphere, as well as some of our student members that are organizing this year's summit. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. So at the end of last workshop, we had the idea of youth engagement and youth as stakeholders in the environment and land management decisions. So I feel free to start kind of brainstorming and think about answers to these questions and type them into the chat. The idea was that we were going to have this on the weight room, so we'll probably have to skip over this portion. But how can youth voices be elevated? How can youth get a seat at the table? And are youth valued enough as stakeholders? And Nick, I just realized there may be some people waiting in the weight room. So if you can just check the weight room and allow them in if we have that.
Yeah, I will do that. And just FYI, Michael joined, so you can make him a co-host as well.
Excellent. Okay, so before we get underway, I'm sure you're familiar with this, a little bit of Zoom etiquette. So just a reminder to turn your microphones off and turn your video off unless we asked your mom or dad for permission. And if you do have an identifying name, if you can just rename yourself with your initials and where you are joining us from, that would be fabulous as well. The chat is going to be zero tolerance, so just we'll be keeping an eye on that and just keep things on topic and related to the workshop. So before we start any of our meetings, we generally start with a land acknowledgement. Alex, are you ready to present the land acknowledgement? Alex?
I can try to connect with him.
Okay, sure.
See what he's up to. So yeah, I think should we just keep going for now? And
absolutely. Unfortunately, like I don't have a land acknowledgement prepared at last minute, but we are joining, like the Biosphere is joining us from Treaty 7 land, which is home to the Blackfoot, Stoney Nakoda, Tsuut'ina nations. And it's an important step to, in reconciliation, actively participating in this process and recognizing the land in which we are joining from. It's important to be mindful of the land and the original inhabitants of the land in which you dwell. It's this land that sustains us and connects us. And so since Alex won't be here today, we may have time to finish the presentation with his land acknowledgement that he's prepared. So welcome to our third workshop in the pre-summit series. It's designed to prepare students for the Canadian Rockies Youth Summit, which is quickly approaching, May 12th to 14th. And it's also being designed to educate each and every one of you about the Canadian Rockies, environmental issues, and decision-making processes, which include land management, stakeholders, and how to take action. Today's workshop is focused on stakeholders and partners in environmental and land management decisions. And so we're going to introduce that idea of developing an action project today, which is one of the goals for our network. So at workshop 1, we kind of asked you why the Canadian Rockies, why should we value it? We offered the perspective of the Stoney Nakoda people as well as the Canadian Rockies wildlife on what a sense of place means. Workshop 2, we dived into land management issues and our pillars: Indigenous knowledge, climate change, sustainable land development, watersheds, wildlife, and biodiversity. And this workshop is going to be focusing a little bit deeper on different perspectives and the idea that all that all stakeholders play a valuable role in our environmental solutions and land management. And we also really want to tap into the idea that you as youth have a valuable place as stakeholders. People are listening to your voices as exemplified through people like Greta Thunberg. And so today, we hope that through examples from our experts such as Elliot Fox and Michael Hay, you will understand the importance of stakeholder management and how you can create partnerships with stakeholders when you're designing your environmental action project. It's really important to build relationships, and that is what this workshop is going to be all about. So you're going to have an opportunity throughout to brainstorm and discuss these ideas. So feel free to take off your mic and put up your hand or type your ideas into the chat. Is everybody ready? Awesome. So what is a stakeholder? We have a little bit of a pop quiz today. I'll read aloud the answers and feel free, if you have read ahead, to type in what you think a stakeholder is. Lucas, you can just send Linda the same link that that I sent to you. You have access to that through your Google invite. Is it possible for you to send that to her? Or she might be in the, is anybody in the waiting room?
It looks like Linda's already on.
Okay.
I'm on now, thank you.
Perfect. I will make Lucas a co-host as well. Okay, great. So what is a stakeholder? Is it a group of people holding wooden stakes with signs on them, shouting loudly what they want? Is it a person or a group of people with shared values and an interest or a concern in something, especially a business? Individuals, organizations, and businesses that might have a stake in the outcomes of a project or a plan? Or groups of people, organization, businesses, government agencies, municipalities, residents, tourists affected by a land management plan? I want to see some answers in the chat. A, B, or C, or D? Benjamin, our youth director, said B, C, D, and especially A. E, all of the above. That was what I was hoping to see. So just to be clear, all of these are reasonable descriptions of what a stakeholder is, but A is kind of a protester, so protest. So this is a way for stakeholder groups to get attention when their concerns are not being listened to. So why are stakeholders important? Well, they're important in our action projects, as I mentioned before, and they're important in land management decisions. So I want you to, if you have a piece of paper, to write this down. You need to know how to identify stakeholders in this workshop. So questions you can ask yourself to help identify a stakeholder is who's going to be the most impacted by the work of the project. Might be your action project. It might be a project that a business is working on. It might be a project that a town, such as the Town of Banff, is working on. Who is the most interested in being involved? So you obviously need to have interested groups, or else you aren't going to have a very engaged stakeholder discussion. And who's going to provide the most valuable input? They might have resources. They might have expert opinions. So that is what you're looking for when you're identifying a stakeholder. Now, let's relate this back to the idea of action projects. This is one of the goals of the Canadian Rockies Youth Network, is to get you engaged on a project that means something to you. So an action project is a multi-step process in which you're going to address an environmental issue, learn about it and the potential solutions, of course, identify the stakeholders, and take action to create some positive change. And sharing beyond your immediate community is a bonus. So the key in any project success is relationships, partnerships, and mentorships. Stakeholders can also be partners. And whenever you're looking at an issue, you want to move past the us versus them and find common ground. Relationships are key. So who wrote down the questions? Well, those are also very useful for identifying possible partnerships. Remember, those are benefit from the work of your projects, have a vested interest in being involved, and could provide valuable input. It's just important to note before we proceed that Indigenous people are rights holders and not stakeholders. The lands that we've deemed national parks, provincial parks, towns, and cities were taken from them, and we must respect treaty rights. Indigenous nations have constitutional rights for water, wildlife, and their land to be protected. They're legally entitled to consultation, access, and preservation of their treaty lands. And it's important that we honor and recognize these treaty rights and treat them as equal partners in land management decisions. So without further ado, we are going to be speaking with Elliot Fox. The Blackfoot and other Indigenous worldviews place a great emphasis on relationships. And remember in last workshop when Daryl Kootenai highlighted how the bison represents the concept, all my relations. In all my conversations with Elliot leading up to this workshop, it's been a privilege. And with all these conversations, he's highlighted bison, wolves, and fire both times. These are a continual reminder of the concept of all my relations. All the members, all the stakeholders, all the partners, all the parts of the ecosystem have a role to play. So though fire may be seen as destructive, it's necessary. The bison's poop, though stinky, makes a mini food chain, and their body depressions create little mini wetlands in the spring. And the wolf, though previously seen as a nuisance in our national parks, is now understood as a keystone species. And their presence on the landscape can even change the way rivers flow. And I'll drop a link to a film a little bit later in the presentation here. So Elliot Fox is a member of the Kainai Nation Blood Tribe and First Nation Blackfoot Confederacy, and he's worked in national resource conservation and land management for over 24 years. He's also worked at the Earthwatch Institute as the co-lead technician on restoring fire, wolves, and bison in Waterton Lakes National Park. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome Elliot.
Thank you, Mallory. Okay. Itakaks, stuan na go magoyo gini. Kitkanat simatsimukwa. Hello, friends. I just told you in the Blackfoot language. Hello, friends. My name is Elliot, but I gave you my my Blackfoot name, which was given to me by a late elder, and it translates to wolf caller. So apparently there was a really powerful healer back in the 1800s, and I was bestowed with his name, so I'm very honored. Yeah, so I'm glad to see everybody. Firstly, I'd like to just say thank you to Mallory and the Canadian Mountain Youth Network for allowing me to provide a presentation for your group. Yeah, so it's really great that your network is established, and it's really important. I was telling Mallory, you know, I'm a dad. I've got 2 boys, but they're men now, and I have 2 grandkids. And I was telling Mallory, you know, when I was young, probably, I don't know, maybe 20 years old, some of my elders would tell me, you know, you have to, they would give me a lot of direction. And they would tell me, you know, you're going to be one of our leaders in the future. And I thought, what? Whatever, you know, but it's really true. So I'm really, it's really cool to see that the Canadian Mountain Youth Network is doing what you're doing. So it's really important for our future. Okay, I will get into my presentation. So I'm going to talk about Canadian Rockies, the stakeholders in land management. I'm going to give you a Kainai Blackfoot perspective on sustaining natural landscapes through partnerships and collaboration. And obviously it's for the pre-summit workshop number 3 today for the Canadian Rockies Youth Network. Yeah, so I'm going to talk first about the Blackfoot people. So what we call ourselves is Siksikatsitapiop. That's all the Blackfoot people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our worldview and how we see the world and just some general concepts. So the Blackfoot people have existed in this part of the continent for millennia, tens of thousands of years, and consists of 4 tribes or nations: the Kainai, where I'm from, or the Blood Tribe, the Piikani Nation, which is between Pincher Creek and Fort Macleod, Siksika Nation, which is east of Calgary near Strathmore, and those are the Canadian Blackfoot tribes. And then we have the Amskapipiikani Nation, or the Blackfeet tribe, and they're located in northern Montana in the US. So all 4 of our tribes practice the same customs and ceremonies and speak the same language, although there are slight variations of dialects with each tribe. So the Blackfoot people believe we are part of the whole universe, including the sky people and spirits. Yeah, we have stories and about the stars. So we've known about the stars for a long time. The land and animal spirits, what we refer to them as is the 4-leggeds and the 2-leggeds, including humans. And then we've got the animal flying spirits, or the birds, and the underwater spirits, the beavers, muskrats, otters, and fish, among others.
Elliot, I'm just going to pause you. I just want to let you know that you're not screen sharing right now. So if you wanted to share your slides with us, just press that green button at the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. No problem.
No, it's, I still get very nervous with these presentations.
Me too. It's all good.
All right, here we go. Yeah, so what I was saying was the Blackfoot people believe that every plant, animal, even rocks are alive or animate and have life, and that everything has a right to live. We believe humans are part of the ecosystem or our environment, and we're not above it, and we don't control it. We believe that most native plants are medicines for humans and animals. The humans and animals doctor themselves and know what to eat or drink to heal when they feel sick. I was talking to one of our elders yesterday, Mike Brucehead, and he said, you know, these animals, we don't see it, but sometimes they get sick, but they know what to eat to heal themselves. And, you know, just probably in the past couple 100 years, horses have arrived on the landscape. And he said, you know, these horses, when they get sick, they eat wild licorice. I don't know if you know what it is, but anyway, so they eat that when they don't feel good, and it heals them. So that's generally how we view the world as Blackfoot people. I'm just going to talk about traditional Blackfoot territory. So as you can see, this is traditional Blackfoot territory, and I got permission to use this slide from Elliot Fox. She finished her Master's of Science degree at the University of Lethbridge probably 15 years ago, and her thesis was on Blackfoot territory. So our territory included lands in what are now Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, and Wyoming, and was bounded on the west by the Rocky Mountains, on the north by the North Saskatchewan River, on the east by the Great Sand and Cypress Hills in Saskatchewan, and on the south by the Yellowstone River. So as you can see, this is our territory with the Canadian provinces and the United States states. But so I believe Paulette looked at early travelers, explorers, traders, and their notes, and the traditional place names of in our territory, and she interviewed some of our elders. So I don't know exactly what all these dots are, but those are significant places in our territory. So this shows our current Canadian Blackfoot reservations or reserves. So on the top here is Siksika, and they're just east of Calgary, and that's our current reserve lands. Then we go south here, and this is Begunny, the Begunny Nation. They're between Fort McLeod and Pincher Creek, and then the red one here, orange, is the Blood Tribe, and that's where I'm from. So this is where we are now, and all these place names are, I guess, indicated in the Blackfoot language. So it just shows you like where we name places and how they were important to us. This is just a regional location map of southern Alberta. So as we can see, this is the Blood Reserve. We got an area of our timberland, just almost within Waterton Park, right by the US border. And here's Calgary. So that's where I'm from. So I'm going to talk about transboundary partnerships. Since the creation of Canada and Alberta in 1867 and 1905, respectively, European settlement and development have encroached on the former prairie and mountain landscapes. As a result, over the past 140 plus years, these landscapes have undergone significant changes as a result of disturbance, development, and cultivation of these lands. What were former natural ecosystems were transformed into developed and changed landscapes with different land jurisdictions that govern them. Here we are today and living in this significantly changed landscape, and there remains intact wilderness, albeit very reduced, and places we can still go and visit and see these wild areas where we can still see wildlife, fish, camp, and enjoy our surroundings. These areas are disappearing fast, so we're very lucky to still have these places to visit with our families. If we don't take care of these areas and allow continued development, for example, coal mining, oil and gas exploration, more cattle grazing, and off-highway vehicle use, among other things, we will have such a significant impact that our children and grandchildren will no longer be able to visit and enjoy these areas in the future. In order to maintain the wild areas that are left, we need to work together with all jurisdictions. I truly believe, from my experience, we can sustain what's left of these beautiful landscapes by partnering with each other to do this. I'm going to show you some slides of how we can make this happen and how we are making this happen. So this is just a map of Alberta. And what it is it shows the natural regions and subregions of Alberta. Scientists refer to these as biomes. So I just wanted to show this because in this purple area along the Rocky Mountains, you know, it's high elevation alpine habitat, and it's rock and ice. And then it's, as you go lower in elevation, it turns into subalpine. So there's some vegetation, and then it goes into montane forest here where I'm from. And then it turns into aspen, or what they call foothills parkland. And then it turns to prairie when you get east of the mountains. And so it turns into fescue grass. And then further east, it turns into, because it's drier, moist or mixed grass prairie. So what I'd like to convey here is we've got a very diverse province here in terms of our location within the landscape. And so you can, like I've told my kids and others, you know, like I live near Cardston, Alberta, and you can drive to Cameron Lake, which is probably, I don't know, 35, 40 minutes. And you can see the alpine habitat and some of those animals like the bighorn sheep and the mountain goats. And then drive to Lethbridge, which is probably an hour and a half. And then you're into a totally different ecosystem. So you can see all the diversity that our province has. So about partnerships. So we're partnered with the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative. And so what my friend Harvey Locke, he's from Banff, he started this initiative, I believe it was in the late 90s. And so his vision was to protect all the wild areas left from Yellowstone here in the south to the Yukon. And it's mostly along, like in the mountains. So it's very, it's one of the last wilderness areas that are intact, left on the continent and even in the world. So it's a very important place, and there's still all those animals that were here 200 years ago. So the Yellowstone Yukon project is I think pretty important. And again, it's about partnerships. So if you look at all those areas from Yukon to Yellowstone, there's a whole bunch of different government jurisdictions and tribal jurisdictions and others. So, you know, it's a big task, but we're supporting Harvey, so we think we can get this done. So this is the crown of the continent ecosystem. So it just shows you on this map where it's at. And I know some of the students are from Calgary and further north, but this is southwest Alberta, southeast BC, and northwest Montana. And so the Blood Tribe is part of this partnership. So the crown of the continent is internationally recognized for its biodiversity and landscape form. In relatively short distances and small areas, landscapes range from flat grasslands to soaring peaks, from rock and ice to lush forests, from uninhabited wilderness to densely populated settlements. This varied landscape sees a likewise varied range of wildlife species and vegetation communities, a full complement of large carnivores, which are grizzlies, black bears, wolves, and cougars, and you can probably include wolverines, and ungulates, which are hooved animals, and they're ruminants, so they have more than one stomach. So they're like elk and deer and moose, can be found in the region, and valleys in the crown of the continent serve as important wildlife movement corridors, representing one of the last areas with the potential for such large-scale connectivity. Here's a zoomed-in version of the crown. So it's just southwest of Calgary, probably west of Nanton. So it's kind of hard to see, but it's this green boundary. So that's the crown ecosystem. Yeah, so it's still fairly intact and still has a lot of those plants and animals that are still there. So the crown of the continent is one of North America's most ecologically diverse and jurisdictionally fragmented ecosystems, encompassing the shared Rocky Mountain region of Montana, British Columbia, and Alberta. This 28,000 square mile ecological complex, well, I guess for the younger ones, it's 72,000 square kilometers, spreads across 2 nations, across 1 state and 2 provinces, and across numerous Aboriginal lands, municipal authorities, public land blocks, private properties, working and protected landscapes. So as you can see, there's a whole bunch of jurisdictions, but we're all partnering to try to make sure we can sustain this area for our future generations. The headwaters of 3 of North America's major river systems flowing to 3 different oceans are encompassed within the Crown ecosystem. The Saskatchewan, which flows east to Hudson Bay. The Missouri, that flows southeast to the Gulf of Mexico and into the Atlantic. And the Columbia, which flows west to the Pacific Ocean. As a result, the crown of the continent has been called the water tower of North America, because there's so many people that depend on the drainage of all those mountain waters to live. So the productive landscape has drawn people to this region for millennia, with the last century seeing a dramatic increase in industries and residents. This relatively narrow slice of the continent now sees upwards of 2 million people using its landscapes. The last century has seen dramatic increases in protection as well, with the designation of numerous parks, wilderness, and other protected areas. So this is a picture of right near the boundary of Waterton and Glacier National Park in Montana. This is the North Belly River, so we were looking for bull trout spawning beds last October, and it was freezing, but we had to walk in the river and look, and we found they're still there. So I'm just going to talk about this native trout recovery project that the Blackfoot Confederacy led last year. So we had 13 partners, and in the top, well, the lead agency was the Blackfoot Confederacy Tribal Council, and they're out of Calgary. But they represent the Piikani Nation, which is on the left here, the Blood Tribe, or Kainai, us, my community, Siksika Nation east of Calgary, and the Amskapi Piikani, or the Blackfeet, which are in northern Montana. So that's the Blackfoot Confederacy. But we had partners on board, which was the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Parks Canada, Waterton, Alberta Environment and Parks, the Alberta Riparian Habitat Management Society, or Cows and Fish, the University of Victoria, Dr. Karen Helbing's lab processed all of our environmental DNA samples, Charlton Limited Canada, the Old Man Watershed Council based in Lethbridge, and AJM Environmental, who provided our biologist. So it was funded by the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk, and which is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So it was a Blackfoot shared leadership and capacity support in native trout recovery, addressing climate change, non-native species, and habitat loss. So our objectives were, we wanted to hire 1 field tech from each of the tribes or the nations. Due to the pandemic, the Blackfeet in Montana couldn't participate. So we conducted eDNA sampling, or environmental DNA sampling, in various tributaries of the Oldman and the Bull River to determine the presence or absence of cutthroat and bull trout and other introduced species. So environmental DNA, it's pretty cool technology. Because way back in the 90s, when I first started working with fish, we would have to either electrofish. So we had this backpack, and you would put an electrical charge in the water, and the fish that were there would get temporarily shocked, and they'd float up to the surface. So we'd net them, and that was a way to try to tell what kind of fish were in that stream. But with this eDNA, all you do is you take a water sample of a stream where you don't know what kind of fish are in there. So we sent these to UVic, the lab, and they sent them back about a month ago. And so we know what kind of fish are in those streams. So it's really non-intrusive, and it's pretty cool. We also installed water temperature data loggers in various tributaries of the Oldman and the Bow, just to keep track of water temperatures. Trout need cool, clear, cold water to survive. And so we just put those in to keep track of the water temperatures. We conducted stream habitat assessments, and we worked with various government and non-government agencies to restore stream habitat that's been negatively affected by human development. So we were in the Upper Oldman, and we were also in Wyperus Creek, west of Calgary, and right around Evan Thomas Creek, just near Banff. So we also conducted cutthroat and bull trout red surveys. So our red is a spawning bed in various tributaries of the Oldman and the Bow to confirm cutthroat and bull trout spawning activity. Due to the pandemic, we couldn't start until mid-August, so we missed cutthroat, the cutthroat spawning window. Cutthroat are true trout and they're spring spawners. So they start spawning in late June, early July. And whereas compared to bull trout, they're not a true trout, they're a char actually. And they spawn in the fall. But me and the biologist traveled to the Porcupine Hills and did a cutthroat spawning survey on Canada Day, actually last year. And we found cutthroat in Beaver Creek. And what I didn't know at that time, and you know, that creek is pretty degraded and those fish are barely hanging on. But what I didn't know, what our biologist told me was, these are some of the most pure, genetically pure strains of cutthroat left in Alberta. And I was like, wow. And you know, they're barely hanging on and they're very resilient. Yeah, and then we mostly did bull trout surveys. And the final objective was to interview elders from each of our Blackfoot nations to document traditional ecological knowledge regarding the significance of native trout, water, and Blackfoot place names in traditional Blackfoot territory. And I actually did the interviews, and oh my goodness, I learned so much because we have, our places go from just west of Edmonton all the way down to Yellowstone. And in here, like in the Bow and the Oldman, there's so many significant traditional places that we used and we named. And yeah, so it was pretty interesting to interview those elders. So here's just pictures of so we're doing of our work. So we're doing eDNA sampling. So all you do is you take this long boom and you put a water bottle at the end and it's clamped in, and then you take a water sample. So this is our biologist, Matt Coombs. This is Carly Greer. She's from Peagunny, but she was working with Waterton. So she came out to help us a few days. These two guys are from the Peagunny Nation, Brent and Blair Little Mustache, who were taking water samples. I believe this is in the Upper Oldman. And this is Alvin First Rider here in the lower left, taking another stream sample. And so what you have to do is you have to filter all the water through this device. And this is Blair filtering the water. And here's Brent and Alvin. It goes through a paper filter that's probably a little bigger than a toonie. And you have to make sure you don't contaminate it with human DNA. So you take this little filter and pop it into an envelope and just document on the envelope where the sample's from. So that's how they can tell what fish are in those streams. We did some habitat restoration. This is on Dutch Creek in the Upper Oldman. So here's our group, safely distanced, getting instructions on what we were going to do that day. So we pruned a whole bunch of willows. And as you can see, the stream crossing is really degraded. There's a whole bunch of OHVs and cattle. And so what we did was we planted a whole bunch of willow stakes to try to restore the stream bank and stabilize the stream bank. So in next year we'll go see if those willows are growing still, and hopefully in the future they'll grow bigger and stabilize the stream bank. And this is Sophie Forstrom from the Oldman Watershed Council. She was kind of our instructor that day. This is bull trout spawning surveys. So here's Joe, many fingers, he works in Waterton. He's measuring the spawning bed here's Alvin and Matt. They're collecting the data and documenting. And here's just, we're measuring. So we measure the length, width, and depth of the spawning bed and just document it, and we GPS it. And in the lower left, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see this clean gravel. That's a spawning bed. That's a bull trout spawning bed. We actually saw bull trout in this stream. So what the bull trout do is they'll scrape the rocks, and so it cleans off the algae. And they dig a little pit, and the females do most of the work. And then they deposit their eggs, and the males are right there behind them, and they fertilize them. So bull trout reds are usually where there's groundwater upwelling into the stream. And that's because, so they find these places, and actually they're very similar to salmon. They go spawn where they were born. And so it's usually in areas where there's groundwater coming up, so the eggs don't freeze over the winter. But unlike salmon, those bull trout don't die. So they go back, and they still live and hopefully come up the river again to spawn. And this lower right, we're decontaminating our gear because there's whirling disease in the bow and the old man. And so we had to decontaminate all our gear before we moved to a different stream. And this is installing the water temperature data loggers. So they're connected to a piece of rebar. So we got to drive them into the river, the bottom of the river, the substrate. And it's a little plastic, probably the size of, I don't know, maybe a Tupperware container, like I don't know, 4 or 5 inches, 6 inches. And you unscrew the housing, and there's a little computer in there. And that's what takes the water temperatures. So you drive that into the bottom of the stream, and this is our project manager, Kimmy Shade, pointing at the water temperature data loggers here, this little white device. This is Brent pointing to this. This is in the Belly River. This is actually in the Old Man. And here we are driving those water temperature data loggers into the river. And you can see Lance here is pointing to this. So when we come back next year, you download this app, you unscrew the housing, you turn the device on, and you download all of the water temperature data for the past year. So it gives you the water temperature every hour for the past year. And that's it. So that's all I've got. So thank you again. And I guess I'd be happy to take any questions. I'm just going to stop sharing. Share screen.
Hey, Mallory, I think you're muted.
Yeah, so
There we
How do
go. Thank you so much, Elliot.
how do I quit sharing?
I already stopped your sharing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a
So
little,
thank you so much, Elliot. We have a little bit of time for a couple questions if you have any questions on those projects that Elliot worked on. And as they demonstrated, is that it takes a lot of different partnerships to make one action project possible. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to kind of let a question percolate. Oh, we have a hand up. Invite. Who had their hand up?
I do, Mallory.
Great, go ahead. Who is that?
My name is Teslin.
Hi, Teslin from Jasper.
Yeah, hi. I was really interested about the DNA testings that you did just by taking water samples and figuring out the biodiversity in the streams. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, if there's like a maximum size of the body of water that could be used, if you get like data on all kinds of different organisms and indicators on the health of the environment.
well, okay, so when you're trying to see what different species of fish are in the stream. The lab we work with at UVic, they need markers, DNA markers of whatever fish you're sampling for. So we had to send the UVic lab a whole bunch of fin clips of bull trout, cutthroat trout, brook trout, rainbow trout. And so they could establish a marker. And so when we send the samples to the lab and she processes those, she can determine what fish species are there. But if you wanna measure, I guess, invertebrates, like, you know, those little bugs in the stream that don't have a spine, you'd have to send the lab reference markers of the DNA that you're trying to find. So all we did was fish. And so if you wanted to measure for invertebrates or muskrats or beavers or mink or whatever, they would need an eDNA or a DNA sample of whatever species you're trying to find, and they would need to reference it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That makes sense. And that's actually really interesting. Sorry. Sorry. That's really interesting. Thank you. If, for example, the body of water was polluted or contaminated in any way that affected the DNA of certain organisms by like mutilating its offspring, would you be able to identify things like that?
I don't think so at this point. It's pretty new technology, so they're still figuring it out. But the UVic lab is one of the leading labs in the world for environmental DNA with fish. They don't do invertebrates or other mammals, they just do fish. So I don't think they would be able to tell at this point if there was some disease in the fish, unless maybe they had a sample of the DNA of the disease. So at this point, I don't think they can do that, but you never know. I'm sure they're gonna probably figure that out in the next few years.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Elliot. Teslin, I will make sure if you feel comfortable with it, Elliot, I will connect the two of you. It sounds like you have some more questions to ask, but we have to stay on track. So we just have one more question. If you can just answer it shortly, it might not be as simple as that. But Elliot, how are trout species being impacted by the loss of glaciers? And that is from Mr. Rob's class in Calgary to everybody.
Good question. Well, right now, I don't think, well, I could be wrong, but the glaciers are still there, but they're disappearing fast. So there's no doubt in my mind, because these trout depend on that cold, clear, clean water. At this point, and you know, that's why we want to keep track of these water temperatures in the streams to be able to monitor those to you know, see how cold or warm the water is. But you know, right now the bull trout populations and the cutthroat, they're still there, but you know what, like I've been told, the glaciers are going to be gone in my lifetime, if I live that long, maybe 20 to 25, 30 years. So there's no question in my mind that that's going to definitely impact these fish in the future, because if they don't have that cold glacier runoff, the water is going to warm up, and I don't know, unless they can adapt, they're probably going to disappear, which would be really sad.
Thank you so much for your presentation today, Elliot. I feel like we've learned a lot about trout testing, as well as the crown of the continent. I think that we always pay attention to Banff National Park, but it's nice to move our eyes down further south. So
Yeah,
we will.
You all have to come down to Waterton.
Absolutely.
So before I leave, Mallory, thank you again, and I just want to thank all the teachers and students for the great work you're doing. Like I said, you're going to be our leaders, students in the future. So I'm really glad to see that you're doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elliot. If Nick, if you can just put my speaker on, that would be amazing. Awesome. Okay, so next slide, please, Alex. A couple more slides, just keep them coming. So we will have to skip the breakaway sessions, but you know what, because I don't want to keep Michael Hayes from the Town of Banff waiting. However, the breakaway session was centered around the idea of identifying stakeholders and partners in your community. Alex, if you could put that slide back on there, that would be amazing. And so the idea behind this is we want to understand who you view as stakeholders on an issue that you view as important in your community. So if you have time to work on this breakaway session as a classroom, it would be great if you were able to email that into us. That will help us build out our workshops and also build our summit to be inclusive of all the different unique mountain perspectives that we have joining us here at this workshop, as well as perspectives beyond the mountains. So next slide, please. So without further ado, when it comes to stakeholders, the Town of Banff has a lot of them. It's a small town, but has millions of visitors annually. Banff is also looked to as a leader in the environment. It is located in Canada's first national park and is one of the few towns within the national park boundaries. Alex, there's something really weird with the screens. They just keep popping off and on. So maybe you just want to turn your screen off. That would be perfect. So Michael Hay here to talk about some unique environmental projects the Town of Banff has been working on and the stakeholders involved. And since 2019, he has been the Town of Banff Manager of Environment and Sustainability. He brings his passion for sustainable transportation, climate change action, water quality, security, and waste reduction into tackling the urban-sized sustainability issues Banff faces. Some of the cool projects that he's going to talk about is the Banff Room Transit Station, a biomass heating facility, and solar energy projects. Without further ado, please welcome Michael Hayes.
Good afternoon, Mallory, and everybody else on the call. Can you hear me okay? And am I coming through clear?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to put a spotlight on you, sir.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen here, Mallory, if that's okay.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay.
You look like a commander.
A commander?
Yeah, you're like ready to go, Air Force.
Oh, I got you. Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Hay. I have, oh, I'm in the wrong slide here. I'll just go back home. My name is Michael Hay.
Sorry, we
Mallory
can't
said,
see your screen. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
We can't see your screen.
share.
I pressed the wrong button or forgot to press this button. Thank you so much. How are things looking now?
Great. If you just want to expand into presentation view, you'll be ready to rock and roll.
There we go. Okay, good to go?
Yeah.
Awesome, thanks a lot. Yeah, so you got my name now, probably memorized. Yeah, I have probably the best job in the world. I feel that way anyway. It's really great to have Elliot talking in advance of me as well, because he touched on a lot of things that are very, very relevant to the town. And honestly, I've kind of forgotten about my presentation because I've been paying so much attention to his, and I'd love to sit down with him and talk. I'm actually sitting here staring out my blinds at the Bow River. I have a really cool office where I can see the river all day long. I was just down there yesterday and I had some fishermen who were pointing out some bull trout for me. And that's the first time I've actually seen a bull trout in person. I'm not a fisherman. And it really brought that home for me personally, that whenever we do any kind of construction near or around the Bow River, that we are directly impacting species at risk. So I thought that was a really nice introduction to the town, because we really are concerned about these things. because we're sitting in the middle of a national park and a World Heritage Site. Probably the most weird thing about the town of Banff is our governance structure. And most people don't think about this. They think one city is the same as any other city, one town's the same as any other town. But the town of Banff is genuinely unique. First of all, we're the only incorporated, which means like an official business-like town. We're the only incorporated town inside a national park. And because we're sort of an official municipality, we do govern our own municipal affairs. So we set things like bylaws, we look after community services, we run recreation programs, normal things that a municipality does. We tax our residents and businesses. But what's really unique is that we don't own any of the land. None of the businesses own any of the land. None of the residents own any of the land. All of the land is federal. It's all owned by the government, and it's administered by Parks Canada. And everybody knows what Parks Canada is all about. It's all about preserving the environment. So whenever we want to do something that has to do with changing how a piece of land is used, or cutting down trees to put up a building, Parks Canada calls the shots. And the number one shot that they call is you must do an environmental assessment. So nothing happens in the town without an environmental assessment. And that's, again, totally unique amongst municipalities in Canada or any country around the world for that matter. The other really weird thing about us is that we are on a fixed footprint. There's no land for sale. We don't get to say, you know what, our town needs more space. Let's go buy that farmer's land over there. There's nothing like that at all. We have 3.93 square kilometers, and that's all we're ever going to get. And yet we get more and more visitors every year, more and more residents, and the environmental expectations keep going up every year too. So it's a tricky balance for sure. There are a lot of stakeholders, as Mallory said. Parks Canada, really, they're the ones who call the shots. The province of Alberta, in some cases, is quite involved as well. Indigenous groups, I really appreciate that Mallory identified that distinction between stakeholders and rights holders. That's very, very critical. We have a lot of visitors, 4 million a year and counting, and obviously residents, student groups like yourselves, a lot of user groups, so recreation groups, nonprofits, charities, groups like that, and a lot of businesses. So all those 4 million visitors a year bring in a lot of economic activity, and there's a lot of businesses in town whose concerns need to be addressed. And of course, we have neighboring municipalities like Canmore, Lake Louise, Exshaw, and even as far as Calgary, because so many of our visitors come from Calgary. But as you can probably guess, our number one stakeholder is actually not a person at all. It's wildlife. So most people think about the big animals, the big, the ones that make the front page of the pamphlets, grizzly bears and elk. And this is a mule deer here quietly eating in someone's backyard. But actually, in the day-to-day operation of the town, we spend more time, I think, looking at the little guys. So we've got birds, bats, the Banff snail, which is endangered, little brown coyotes, little brown bats that are endangered. We were just demolishing a house about a month ago, but we couldn't demolish it before we went in and we surveyed to make sure there were no bats or no evidence of bats. So you're just really, really careful about any disturbance, even if it's an existing building, to make sure that we're not impacting habitat that we created ourselves by putting up a building. And then of course, bull trout here on the lower right. Recently, the Bow River was declared critical habitat for bull trout. And so the river is under new protections that we need to be conscious of every day. That's a big part of my job, is understanding those protections. So that's just a little bit of background and context. I'm going to jump into some pretty specific examples of our land management challenges now. There's two I want to show. The first is up here on the right. This is our operations compound. So this is kind of the pretty part of town down here. And then there's kind of the ugly part of town, the working part of town, where all the vehicles get stored and the road salt gets stored and stuff like that. That's up here in our operations compound. But we have to be conscious of environmental issues up there just as much as anywhere else. So I'll talk a little bit about that one. what we keep track of very, very carefully, and also Parks Canada ensures that we keep track of this very, very carefully, is land use changes over time. So I'm 40 years old. I was born in 1980. This is a photo from 1978, just around that time. And then there's an equivalent photo of the same area taken last year. It's actually from 2020, not 2021. And on the you can just see there are significant changes in land use that have occurred over this 42-year period by looking back and forth between these two photos. Now, what I've shown here on the left with these green arrows is just like a really, really rough indication of how wildlife are moving through this area. So we have much more detailed and technical data. It's just there's a lot to show. So this just shows that wildlife are moving broadly west to east through this area, and sometimes are crossing through the compound north to south. And you can see how the impact is, how land use has changed. The town of Banff was incorporated in 1990, actually. And in that year, we took this area of the compound here in the north and reverted that back to nature. And we did that because we needed more space in the compound. So we took down some of these trees in our operations compound that you can see today, but that was compensated for through the restoration of this area to the north. Since that time, there's been a little bit of loss and a little bit of gain, and it's more or less balanced out. The part that I've had to deal with since I started in 2019 is our new transit garage project. So you can see that down here. There's a big clear cut area. I'll just flip that off so you can see. That was clear cut in April of last year. Actually, we just finished cutting the last trees a year ago today in that clear cut area there. So that's our new transit storage facility. And there used to be a dog park there also, and that dog park has been moved up to here. We don't have to cut trees down for the dog park, but it has a very high fence so that wildlife and dogs don't interact. So a natural question you might ask here is, well, if you compensated for the trees you cut down in 1990 by restoring space further to the north, how did you get away with cutting down all these trees in 2020? And that's an interesting question. That's a bit tricky. So I'll zoom in here a little bit. This is just an oblique shot from the air of our compound. And this is actually the new transit garage here on the lower right. It was just finished last month. I just took this photo about a week ago. They're still moving in. It's a brand new home for our transit buses. And then there's just a little photo of the dog park here. So what's quite interesting here is that we're trying to accomplish all of these things, improving the wildlife corridor, but to do that, we have to be creative with space. And really what we're trying to do is earn the right to build something new by restoring an area that is important to wildlife. So the way we do that is we look at how we use space now. So these red squares down at the bottom here, or in the middle of the screen, that's where we store our buses right now. And then to the north of that, there's a big pile of wood waste. I'll just flip that off so you can see there's just a huge pile of wood waste. So we've got two big volumes of material, buses and piles of wood waste. And those are connected because we're moving all those buses across the road. So that's some space that we can free up in the compound. And that new building, that new transit garage is actually being heated by wood chips that we are deriving from that wood waste. So this is a waste to energy project that we're putting in place to heat the building. So then we don't have to store as much wood waste. So that shrinks that footprint in the compound. This is just a photo of the bunker where our wood chips are stored. So you can see right now, like we're shrinking that space requirement to the north of this road here and expanding that space requirement to the south. And actually there's a lot of other stuff that we plan to do in the compound to save space as well. We're going to completely change how we manage all garbage and recyclables in the compound to save space. And the ultimate goal is to kind of nudge that wood waste pile to the south a bit and return this entire swath of land to nature sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. This trade, if you will, was a critical part of our conversation with Parks Canada this time last year, where we were basically trying to persuade them that we were going to do the right thing. Yes, we're going to cut down all these trees, but we're also going to, through that activity, we're going to restore some land to the north. And this is really, really important because the land to the north is the heart of the wildlife corridor and is actually more critical for wildlife than the area that we cut down. So it's obviously quite complicated. It takes a lot of work, months and months of of thinking, never mind writing the reports and doing the environmental assessments, but it's worthwhile because the story here is all very positive. Transit, of course, reduces the amount of vehicles we have in the park. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It eliminates crowding. It improves the user experience. But more critically, the more transit, the fewer cars, therefore the less parking. And if you've ever seen a brand new parking lot being built, you have to cut down a lot of trees to build a parking lot. And our transit service services a lot of destinations in Banff National Park: Lake Louise, Johnson Canyon, Moraine Lake, Lake Minnewanka. And by taking down trees on the edge of town, we're able to prevent the loss of habitat elsewhere in the park. So there's a lot of big picture thinking required here. Oftentimes we focus in right on just the thing we're trying to accomplish today, but we need to think about, the decades long story. So I really think of my job as, from a land management perspective, as kind of a crazy game of Tetris, where I've got a fixed amount of space and a lot of blocks coming in, and I don't really know what the next one's going to be, but I've got to find a space for it. And it's very, very challenging. It's a really fun game, but it's like Tetris, one that you're never going to win. I've never met a person who beat Tetris. So that's kind of how it feels from day to day, but it's really, really rewarding. I'll quickly go on to a second case study here. This one's a little easier, a little shorter. We have a lot of elk running through town. I just counted the herd of elk down at the rec grounds on when was that? Tuesday night, and I counted 85 elk in that herd, and I know I missed some. And I think probably one out of every 4 of them was pregnant, because this is the calving season, and they're all hanging out in the rec grounds, like shown in this photo here. This photo was taken out in the rec grounds yesterday or the day before, I think. And the elk come in here because, first of all, there's a lot of grass, and it's basically free food, which is great. And it also gives them protection from predators. They can come into the edge of town, free food, and predators tend not to follow them in. So not always anyway, but from time to time they do. So here's a bear that's actually come into the rec grounds, and a bunch of frightened rugby players. So the issue here is that we're allowing elk to come into the town, which is not their natural habitat. And then potentially they draw in predators. But more critically, both of those groups, elk and bears, are interacting with humans in a way that may not be ideal. The rec grounds is we've developed that area for the use of humans. So what do we do about that? Well, we could fence it. We could fence it and push elk out of the way. So a big part of land management in the town of Banff is enabling wildlife movement while also managing potential conflicts with people. So in this case, we've got some existing fencing around the perimeter of the ball diamonds, but it's kind of open in a number of places. And then we've got a dog park. Actually, we're going to start building in a month. We've got a fenced tennis court as well. So yes, we've got some fencing, but broadly speaking, it's open to elk. But again, we have this issue of elk living in an area where they're not normally supposed to live. It's not natural. And again, the green arrows show where there's a lot of elk moving through the area. So you can see if we did fence off all of our grass playing fields, then we would be impacting some of these elk, i.e. the green arrows. So a difficult question. In the end, Parks Canada said, no, you can't fence the rec grounds. And we're fine with that, of course. If they say that that's the best outcome for wildlife, then that's the best. Kind of do the best we can. So I guess I'll pose this question to you as students and people that are interested in protecting the environment. Which is more important, that wildlife stay completely wild and don't interact with humans at all? Or is it more important that we let them walk through town to get wherever they're going, so that they don't have to, go through the river or cross the highway or something like that? While recognizing that if they're walking through town, they might encounter garbage or people or cars or skateboarders or other types of human wildlife conflict. So these aren't easy questions to answer. And yeah, it's part of my job to evaluate these in different circumstances with different projects. And to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, this is actually the golf course, which is on the other side of town. And similarly, there we've got we call it the salad. It's the elk salad. Lots of grass that they just come in and pick away at. So that's all I really want to talk about. Hope that touched on some interesting things for everyone. I think it's really important that we work with and we learn from authorities and stakeholders and rights holders like Elliot. Again, I was just down at the river talking to some fishermen and learned a lot about fish from them just yesterday and today. I think we have to think long term. Sometimes we get focused right in on what we're trying to build or achieve today, but if we do that, we miss opportunities. Usually, if we think long term, we can start to see how things evolve. We can think about the cumulative impacts of multiple projects, and that's really, really critical in a place like Banff. And I think, as students, you might think that you may not have any impact, but one thing in my job that I remember all the time is one of the first things I heard when I started this job, which is that students in town think that there are too many trees being cut down and not enough trees being planted. And, Joe Blow up the street, business owner or resident, I might not listen that much to that one person, but when I hear it from a body of students that this is a concern, it really influences how I conduct my job day to day. So I encourage you to reach out to municipal officials. They're very, very busy people, and they can definitely use the help. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was super interesting. And it was really cool how you put it in those specific case studies. I definitely found that interesting. If you have any questions for Michael, just because I do want to have time for everyone to lead a discussion, I would encourage you to pop it into the chat, and then with your permission, Michael, I'll send those off to you. If anybody has a quick question, we would have room for that. Okay, we're gonna move along to. Oh, was somebody trying to talk?
I was, but it's okay. We can move along.
Okay, then type your question in the chat, and we will make sure that we get that answered.
I'll just reply in the chat if I can.
Perfect. That's wonderful. Fabulous. Okay, moving along. Thank you so much again, Michael, for joining us. So now you've learned about how groups can work together and how different groups have to work with different stakeholders and rights holders. And so in our breakaway session, which we probably won't have time to come back together to discuss what we discovered, but at least you'll have time to break away and kind of process some of what you learned. So we're going to do a quick breakaway discussion. You're going to be assigned to groups. So group 1, you are a ski resort in Banff National Park. You want to expand into summer hiking, and the area is a fragile alpine meadow. Group 2, you're the town of Banff, and you need solutions for increasing visitation, which is causing car congestion. Group 3, you're an endangered fish species, an endangered fish species breeding habitat is at risk from turbidity from boat tours operating during their breeding season at a mountain lake. Group 4, led by Liam, is a mother grizzly is hanging out at the Nordic Center, and she is charging a group of bikers that are biking at dusk with off-leash dogs. And also, this is in berry season. And then group 5, you are a popular hiking trail which crosses through sacred Indigenous territory and critical grizzly bear habitat. And group 5, which is Adam Robb's classroom, you are a ski touring lodge located in critical caribou habitat in Jasper National Park. And keep in mind, ski touring makes it easier for wolves to travel and hunt caribou in the winter, which gives those species already at risk an unfair advantage. So what you're going to be doing is brainstorming the stakeholders that are involved in this issue. Think about a recreation group, think about a business, think about possible, if it's in a national park, think about the government agencies, maybe a nonprofit or a conservation group that might be around that, or a recreation group. And then brainstorm through the perspective of those stakeholders a couple different solutions. So everybody has been assigned, and we will have a kind of a rep leading you through the conversation. So I'm going to open those breakout groups, and we will have an opportunity to kind of figure out the stakeholders on some issues. You're all alone in here, Nick. Oh, no, you aren't.
No, I've got some people. I'm just seeing if anyone's allowed to put their video on or not.
Well, everybody can just unmute their speakers for starter.
No camera.
Okay, so just a refresher of your group. Do you guys need a refresher or should I move on?
Yeah, I would like a refresher, please.
So you are a ski resort in Banff. The ski resort in Banff National Park wants to expand into summer hiking. The area is a fragile alpine meadow. Nick, my colleague, is going to continue to lead you in on this conversation. So who are the stakeholders that you think are involved, and what are some solutions if you were one of those stakeholders?
Okay. One of the stakeholders would be obviously the skiers, the people that use it, because if we make any changes that they dislike, we could essentially go out of business. So we should
in regards to how best to approach this issue. Like, for example, one thing I could think of is that you might have, just all the gift shops in Banff that might actually benefit quite a bit from all the congestion. However, obviously that's going to leave a footprint that maybe locals might not necessarily.
Mallory's here.
Hey, I was just checking in to
Hi.
see if you guys needed any help.
I think we only have 2 people. I think Mr. Rob's class was supposed to be in here, but they seem to have got kicked out.
No, you guys are they're in a different class.
Oh,
They're
we're in a different, so
focusing
it's
on-
just the 3 of us then?
Yep. So do you
Okay,
guys
cool.
need any help? Or are you good?
I think we're probably pretty good. We're just going over, we just kind of jumped in right now because I had to go make an announcement for the people watching the live stream. But
Okay,
other than
5 minutes.
we're just going through. So just going over the various viewpoints that would be affected, right? And then doing like a
Yep,
mock.
so you're a popular hiking trail crosses through sacred Indigenous territory and critical grizzly bear habitat. So who are your stakeholders or your rights holders? And what solutions do you think they might have to this issue?
So what do you guys think? Oh, here you're in the chat. Never mind, I didn't see that. What this was. Watersheds. No, I'm pretty sure we're critical rights holders because yeah, we're group 5. Oh, Mallory.
Yeah.
Tesla doesn't have a breakout group. Should I bring her into this group?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, give me 1 second.
Does
Yeah, I
anyone?
think especially when you're not fenced off, when there's not an actual dog park or any of that, to know the risks and the interactions that you may face with wildlife. So I think it is necessary to kind of have your pet on a leash.
Hey, Adam, how's your breakout session going? We're going to wrap things up in about 2 minutes. Do you think that maybe you'd want to present what you guys came to the solution of? Think people are slowly starting to trickle in, so we'll just give them a couple more minutes.
Well, so I was typing out my question.
Oh, and then you got
totally missed what stakeholder I had, and it was in the email. So we just talked about we just talked about a ski hills perspective.
Perfect. That's awesome. That's the main point. So as people are kind of filtering back in here, I'll give you, if you did have a chance to, if you want to just type in the chat, one of the stakeholders with your issue and one of the solutions that you maybe came up with, or share something that you learned or got a different perspective. We just want to have as many as you sharing in the chat as possible. So everyone can kind of see this kind of screen right here. I'm just going to kind of jump over to group 4 and just see if they had any solutions. Liam, you are the leader of group 4.
Yes, I am. Would you like me to discuss the solutions that we came up with?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Okay. Well, my group, we had the bear problem question, and we decided that there wasn't a single word answer to solve this problem, but instead educating people beforehand not to have their dogs off leash. And we also talked about maybe not even allowing dogs in national parks where bears can be protected.
And that is a solution in some national parks in the United States.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do any of the other groups want to share? Group 3, Ben?
Yeah. So I accidentally wasn't really paying much attention because I was typing some on my question. So we just talked about being the perspective of the ski hill, and we were kind of interested in what Michael was talking about how animals just kind of how they have those movement corridors and how it needs to be like very natural for an animal to move through a land that is being shared with humans. So we were just kind of talking about solutions to how ski hills could implement that. And we think that animals should have the chance to move through ski hills as much as possible, but we should definitely be discouraging them from going to really high traffic areas. And then maybe just kind of provide more natural areas that they'll kind of gravitate towards that are less trafficked.
Awesome. Alex, did you want to share your group and maybe a solution that you came up with the popular hiking trail crosses through sacred Indigenous territory and critical grizzly bear habitat?
Yeah, sure thing. So we were looking at here. Can you guys hear me? Just to
Yeah.
check. Perfect. So yeah, so we were looking at the hiking trail, and with that, we wanted to ensure that people still had an opportunity to get outside and be able to explore some of these spaces, because that way they can build a deeper connection with the land and go on to care more about it. But we figured that because there was endangered habitat, and it was a sacred Indigenous territory, perhaps the best solution would be to try to find another spot for the hiking trail or move parts of the hiking trail around so that we can continue to protect that area while still allowing people to get out and enjoy the outdoors.
Cool. And I suppose we have time for one more person to share in 30 seconds or so if they want to take the stage. Lucas?
Sure, yeah. So our group talked a lot about the issue of congestion within Banff, and yeah, the main kind of thing we talked about was that it's not a one. There's not. It's really hard to get a one size fits all solution, just because, like, you know, you might have business owners that really benefit from, you know, having a busy town that they can make money from and make a living from, but you also have the issue of maybe wildlife or locals that have to deal with crowds of people that might not necessarily know how to behave with wildlife, or, like, you know, in ways that's kind of respectful to people or creatures living there, right? So I guess there are a couple solutions that we talked about that, like, have been proposed, including, like, I don't know if this has actually been proposed, but like a little rumor that they've considered cutting car access off into Banff to ensure tourists get in through train or through rail, which is interesting just because it would cut down on congestion probably, but it might also, I don't know, limit the amount of people in the town at once for businesses, right? So what I guess the main solution we really talked about was just making sure people have a sense of collective, I guess, responsibility in Banff, making sure people have a sense of collective ownership, like it's your home, right? And that way you can ensure people aren't behaving irresponsibly, and, you know, congestion can become a bit more manageable.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And it is hitting the 2 o'clock mark. So we'll just finish up with wrapping up. And if you're not able to join us for the remainder, you can always watch it on our YouTube channel, Canadian Rockies Youth Summit. I am seeing 2 of myself and it's really freaky. So thank you so much for joining me. We hope that you understand a little bit more about why it's important to consider stakeholders, particularly youth voices in stakeholder land management decisions, and get the juices flowing of how you can engage with stakeholders if you're creating an action project. Environmental issues can be incredibly complex, and it's important to recognize that, that if we engage with stakeholders, we can have a multi-pronged solution. So building relationships and seeking understanding from groups involved is important, and we can create a dynamic where it's us instead of us versus them. So we can work with groups with different backgrounds to find a stronger solution that targets the various users of our national parks and collected spaces. So once again, we're going to bring it back to the idea of elevating youth voices in land management. If you want to email us and share what you think can be done to increase and elevate youth voices, how can youth get a seat at the table? Well, that's what the Canadian Rockies Youth Summit and the report is for. And are youth valued enough as stakeholders? We believe that they should be, and this is a great time to elevate your voice. Like Michael Hayes said in his presentation, he is willing to listen to a collective body of youth, not Joe Blow from down the street that's bugged on something. So
Mallory.
your voice is powerful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'd just like to make a couple of comments before we end this session.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like bull trouts, cutthroat trout, grizzly bears, and wolves, they are all indicator species. And what they indicate is that this landscape might still be healthy enough to sustain these species. I'm going to tell you a quick story. You know, I worked on this wolf project, and it was Belly River wolves. And so what happened was this female wolf dispersed into Waterton in the Belly River back in 1993. And it was the first wolf pack in 40 years to naturally recolonize this part of the country. And so I guess the message I want to say is, and it's all about connectivity and partnerships. So what I learned was there was a DNA, one of the wolf biologists did a PhD dissertation. And so she collected 96 wolf DNA samples in Glacier Park and around southern Alberta and wherever. But what she found was the wolves that recolonized Glacier National Park back in the mid-90s, what she found in her eDNA research was the founding members of that wolf population that's still here today, because I see them, well, I haven't seen them for a while, but I see their sign, I see their tracks, I see their scat. We're based on 6 founding member wolves from Banff. So it's a really important corridor from Banff to Montana or whatever. So that just tells you it's, you know, they're still trying to sustain themselves. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I guess my message is, yeah, it's a really important corridor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for jumping in and sharing. At this point, I guess we've kind of started a sharing circle. So if anybody has time and wants to share or comment on what they learned or what they feel is important, I would certainly open the mic and let you talk. Okay, so I guess that wraps it up. We have a couple one more workshop coming up before our next, before the Canadian Rockies Youth Network, which is May 12th to 14th. Now, we're going to be kicking off this summit with opening ceremonies, which includes some awesome music headliners and artists that care about the Canadian Rockies, and then a full day from 9 to 4 of events on the 13th and the 14th, which are Thursday and Friday. If you want to join our workshop, I'll be sending out a link like the past one for you to register for that. And the next workshop is going to be 2 Thursdays from now on April 29th at the same time, same place. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all your engagement, and it's always really fun to hear all your voices on these topics. Thank you to our presenters, Michael Hay and Elliot Fox, and to our amazing summit organizing team, Ben, Lucas, Alex, Liam, and of course, Ava and Thomas are not there. Elliot, thank you, and have a great day. Get outside.